So today we're joined by Cassius Cash, superintendent of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And Mr. Cash, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. Obviously, being the superintendent of the most visited national park in the country, you're undoubtedly a very, very busy man. So we really appreciate you taking the time.
Well, it's my pleasure. I'm glad I could do this for you.
To begin with, for those who don't have your job, obviously, what does the superintendent of a national park do?
Well, first of all, let me just start off by saying it's an awesome job to have. I have the overall responsibilities of overseeing the management of human resources, the stewardship of our natural and cultural resources of the park, and all other administrative functions that occur to make this park run. So this also includes speaking with lovely organizations like the Tennessee Aquarium. I get a chance to work with local, state, and federal officials as well. So it's an awesome job to have. One of the cool things I really like doing is talking to colleges and universities and high school students about what it is to be a park ranger at the most visited national park in the country. So overall, there are no 2 days alike when you're superintendent here.
I'm hoping you still get a chance to actually be out in the park, though.
I do every now and then, but it's not like what people think. I'm not out there every day with a bluebird on my shoulder, walking around with folks. It's an administrative job, but I do get a chance to have the luxury of getting out and enjoying the park.
One bit of notoriety that you've got is that you were the first Black superintendent of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. That's a pretty important precedent to have set. Do you see occupying this role as making you kind of a de facto role model for Black youth who might be coming up and have never seen somebody in your role who looks like you?
Well, that's a good question. And let me just first of all say that it's an honor to be the first African-American superintendent. And I would say being the first sometimes is not always a comfortable proposition, right? But history tells us it's always a worthwhile one. And so if I can pave the way for other African-American, Hispanic, anybody that wants to pursue to be in this position, hopefully I can serve as that role model. But what I would really want to emphasize, I would like to be considered a role model for all youth that understands and experience the magic of pursuing their dreams. And that's what it's all about for all youth on that. And I always share with young people to allow the curiosity of their success overcome their fear of failure and pursuing their dreams.
So what was it that pushed you down that path initially?
If you're old enough to remember, I remember looking at this show every Sunday called Mutual of Omaha, Wild Kingdom. And I always enjoyed watching that show and just the magic of being able to travel across the world from Sunday to Sunday. One week I could be in the Serengeti, looking at what people do to manage wildlife there. Or the following week I could be in the Everglades. And I just found it always fascinating to see what people did to preserve this earth and preserve the animals within it. And so that helped me pursue and becoming a wildlife biologist in my early professional career.
And you actually deviated a couple of times because you also were interested in pursuing a pre-med degree, I think, and then you kind of took a dogleg into wildlife management. So how'd that happen?
You know, one of the things that I always wanted to do was to help people. And that came from my mother and my father. My father is a retired police officer in Memphis. And so he used to always tell me about things that he did within our community to help people. My mom was a cosmetologist, but she was a special type of cosmetologist. She worked with young kids that were about to undergo chemotherapy treatments. And we all know that when you go through chemotherapy treatments, that you lose your hair. And my mother was able to restore the dignity, if you will, to these young kids before they were about to undergo this treatment. And I used to see the magic and the glow in their eye when she could let them do that with dignity. And so that really brought out me wanting to help people. So at that young period of my life, the only thing I could equate that to was being a doctor. And so that's why I started off being a pre-med biologist major in school. And then, you know, we later pursuing becoming a Boy Scout and things of that nature, introduced and facilitated my relationship with the natural world, kind of allowed me to deviate a little bit And I'd share with folks at this point in my life, I've learned that I can not only help people in a white coat as a doctor, but I also can do it in a green coat as a park ranger.
That's an excellent segue to talking about a couple of initiatives that you have started in your role as superintendent. I'd like you to talk a little bit about how you've tried to transform the 500,000 acres of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park into kind of I don't want to a forum, I guess, for having some pretty difficult conversations and a place for healing. So, can you talk a little bit about the Smokies Hikes for Healing and the Hike 100 program?
Yeah, so let's start with the Hike 100 program. Back in 2016, the National Park Service was celebrating its 100th year anniversary in existence, right? And the model that we used that year was we needed to develop the next generation of users, supporters, and advocates, and I would add employees of the next century. And so we had the slogan saying, "Find your park." All right. And so I understood where we are now as a nation, that back in 1916, when the Park Service was created, 50% of our population lived in urban areas. Now, in 2021, over 80% of our population live in urban areas. And so what I did in celebrating our 100-year anniversary, I committed to hiking 100 miles over a year's time. But I just didn't want to hike to get my exercise and stay in shape. I felt it was important that I rolled up my sleeves and facilitate the relationship between youth in urban areas to their national park. We have kids in Nashville and Knoxville, Asheville that never been to the Smokies. So every mile I hiked, I took youth from urban areas with me. And I thought that I was going to be transforming them, to hear the stories and see that transformation process of how those young folks enjoyed the natural world transformed me as well. And I gave that challenge to people in my community to do the same thing. And at the end of that 1 year, my goal was to celebrate us completing that. And I thought we were going to have about 50 people, maybe 100 people to complete that. Over 2,000 people completed that challenge.
Wow.
And some from different countries that came here and completed that challenge. And so that let me know that leadership matters, and we have a role to play in making sure that we remain relevant in the next century of service for the National Park Service.
That's incredible.
Yes, yeah. So for the Hikes for Healing, when I got this job, no one left me instructions on how to manage the most visited national park during a pandemic. And what we went through as a nation and what we're still going through has been unprecedented. And what we've learned through this is the importance of mental health and emotional well-being as we've gone through this over a period of time. And so we've realized that. And in the middle of that process of learning the importance of that, we experienced a social unrest, something that we haven't seen since the 60s, which I was born in the late 60s. And my parents talked to me about what they experienced back then. And so we hadn't seen anything since then. And it all started, in my mind, with George Floyd. The nation had a chance to see all together a man die on TV. And that compounded my well-being and trying to reconcile. And it forced us to ask ourselves as a nation, where are we with race relations on that? And so one of my mottos is that I needed to get to a place as a son of a police officer, an African-American male, and a superintendent. I needed to get to a place where I can reconcile all of these things, because now I'm in a community where people are asking me for my opinion. And I need to be clear-headed in how I unpack that. So what did I do? I went to the national park, because my motto is that I always come out better than when I was going in. And that was the case in this scenario. And I found during some hikes that I was becoming recharged. I had a clear-eyed, more perspective of where I was in dealing with this. And I said to myself, my God, if I benefited from this, wouldn't members of my community that I love so much do the same? And so that's what I came up with, Smoky's Hikes for Healing. And so what this consisted of was me designating 8 hikes, 4 on North Carolina side, 4 on Tennessee side. And I would select 10 people on each hike. And we would go to special places in the park and have some very serious dialogue about race and how it's affected you and how we can go back as members of our community to make it better through having these discussions. And I was able to do that through hiring special facilitators that were really adept at facilitating those type of discussions. And it was absolutely, again, remarkable and transforming to meet people from all walks of life that talk about their experiences, their perceptions, and their commitment to how they were going to go back and make the community better when it comes to race relations. And to see 10 people go in as strangers and to come out as hugging as one another and stand in contact with one another through this process, again, it was absolutely remarkable and I would never forget it. So at the end of the day, when my kids and my grandkids ask me, what did I do during this time? Like I asked my parents did this during the 60s, what did they do? I feel proud that I can say, this is what I did. And so that was important for me.
If young Cassius could see Cassius today, how do you think he would feel?
He would be proud. He would never guess he would be in this position. But I think he would say that he used his platform to the best of his ability while he had it. And I will continue to do that as long as I have this platform. If I could tell you one more story in regards to this, looking through the administrative records of this park, I'm the 16th superintendent, and the 6th superintendent of this park. He served from late 50s to the early 60s. And of course, segregation was at its highest then. And African Americans could not rent a hotel in Gatlinburg. And the superintendent heard about this story here. And he called all the business leaders, the hotel owners, motel owners, and he said, if you don't change your proposition to how African Americans are treated, I'm going to commit to building a hotel within the Smokies so that they can. Needless to say that there's not a hotel in the Smokies. And the superintendent gained the name of General Patton because of his stance. And so I say to myself, if he had the courage to do it in the late 50s, surely we would have the gumption and the fortitude and courage to do it in 2020.
I grew up in Knoxville, so I grew up sort of in the lap of the Smokies, and
okay.
It's just always been such a special place to me. And I want to know, growing up for you, I mean, in Memphis, on the other side of the state, what was your outdoor experience as a youth? What was your first experience, maybe, that you can recall of being out in the wilderness, and what impact did that have on you?
Well, my first experience, again, as I said, my relationship with the natural world was introduced by being a Boy Scout over a period of years there. And that helped facilitate my comfort level in being outdoors over that period of time. And it had a profound impact on me because once it introduced me to understanding that I'm an introvert, right? And I always found that I was recharged from coming from out of the natural world, going back into, let's say, an urban area. And that is still true today. And that's where I find my energy, my synergy, and my peace. And I always tell people that the outdoors is always good for the mind, body, and soul. And that's what I'm trying to facilitate with youth. Not only youth, but people that have not experienced their national parks year round.
So you have mentioned in the past that for a lot of Black youth, that's not their perception of the wilderness. They have a very different view of the woods, and not as a place of healing and mental recharge, but as a place of danger. How do you combat that notion, that attitude?
So you remember me talking about when I grew up, I watched Mutual of Omaha Wild Kingdom, and my imagination was tapped. Um, Sometimes I find young kids, people that live in urban areas, imaginations are tapped in a different way. I want you to think about your favorite scary movie. Okay, take a moment to think about that. And when you think about that movie, and you start to hear those special sound effects that you know someone is about to get whacked, where does it normally happen? In the woods. And when does it normally happen? At night. And so I find when I bring youth that have not been in the woods before, the first thing I think about is what's going to hurt me, what's going to bite me, am I going to get lost, right? And the more that they find themselves being able to navigate that new world, the more comfortable that they become. And that's what I realized, and that's what I witnessed during the Hype 100 experience, that same transformation, that they wanted to come back. And so I felt proud about that. But that's where I find most urban youth. It's not that they don't want to be out there, it's just they have to erase that chalkboard and paint a different imagery of their experience in the woods. And I think that's more of a sustainable memory than a TV show.
So the National Park Service was established, you said back in 1916, to conserve the landscapes, historic objects, and wildlife of America's wilderness and ensure their enjoyment is unimpaired for future generations. Why do you think it's important that these places are protected and that people are able to get out and experience them?
You know, the National Park Service, we are America's storytellers of these special places, right? And we have the responsibility to highlight the natural beauty, tell the stories of our advancements, tell the stories of our struggles as a nation, and also on the other side, to talk about the accomplishments as a people. And we as a people, we all look different and we come from all walks of life that adds to the rich history of what this nation is. And I think that's an important story that should be told. The most powerful experiences or most powerful experiences that people get from when they go into the national park are the stories that they see themselves in, whether it's from the birth and the founding of this nation in Boston, or if it's going to talking about equal rights with Martin Luther King, or even the rich history or the rich biodiversity that lies here in the Smokies. Those are stories and facts that people don't know about, that we make known. And I think that's a huge responsibility when you talk about generation. And it really humbles you because you're talking about something bigger than yourself. And so the Park Service is in the forever business. And that's a huge responsibility. And I think getting out to national park system, whether it's a cultural site or a natural site like the Smokies, it all comes together. And the reason that I work for the Park Service, because there's not many organizations that moves with American consciousness. As we learn more, we tell more. And that's not what you see in most government organizations. And I think that what makes the Park Service a special place to work.
Again, I grew up right next to the Smokies. Why is it visited by so many people? It's the most visited national park in the country. I think more than 12 million people go there every year. Why? What is the magnetic appeal of this place that straddles the border between Tennessee and North Carolina?
Well, when you think about a beautiful spot like the Smokies, that's within an 8-hour drive of half the United States population, location, 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 as we say, that matters. And then once you get to the Smokies, the thought of having over 800 miles of trails and the different biodiversity that you can see here is second to none. We have one of the most diverse ecosystems in the world. We have over 20,000 documented species in this park. And 1,000 of those species are new to science. Imagine that, 1,000 new species that are discovered here in this park that is new to science. So that really gives you an understanding of how diverse. And so you get a chance to experience this park throughout the year in a different way, whether it's fall or whether it's in March, in the spring, and wildflowers. There's always something to do, even if you go to the same location.
It also is the location where 70 miles of the Appalachian Trail goes through. And the Appalachian Trail is featured very prominently in a new IMAX film that we have premiering here at the Tennessee Aquarium IMAX 3D Theater, Into America's Wild. And that whole film is wrapped up in the notion of self-discovery out in the woods, and sort of the feeling that you get from, like you've talked about, the mental benefits of being out in the wilderness. Do you feel like the Smokies, just because of that proximity to that many people, is many people's gateway to having those experiences for the first time?
Absolutely. And that talk about, you talked about, there's over 12 million people that come here to this park. I want to emphasize and underscore the importance of remaining relevant and the programs that you've heard me talk about in order to do that, facilitate that. I think to remain relevant in the next century of service, it's not going to necessarily be about how many people are coming to the park. It's going to be who's coming to the park. And I think we should really emphasize that we have a responsibility in making sure the next generation understands the importance of a place like the Smokies. Because to be honest with you, I felt that there was a sense of apathy, particularly with our young folks, because you have things like cell phones, iPads, and you can take those things for granted. That's my role here, and I think we're in the perfect location, as you said, to serve as a gateway, that you don't have to travel across the country to Yellowstone, that you can do that within the day's drive. So we want to take advantage of that opportunity and that gateway, as you talked about, to people really enjoying their national park.
Superintendent Cash, I think that's an excellent place for us to wrap up what has been a very engaging discussion about one of my favorite places on Earth. So it's been a real pleasure to talk to you, to hear about your experiences, your precedent-setting role as the first Black superintendent of the most visited national park in the country. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Well, thank you again, and good luck with your IMAX release, and you take care.